Our subject this morning is what is spirituality? But before I get into that seriously, I want to talk just a moment again, reminding us that February is Black History Month, and a early teacher of Science of Mind was Pearl C. Woods, who actually founded the Triangular Center for Spiritual Religious Science in Los Angeles, and who was actually a minister to Ernest Holmes back in the days when Ernest was still saying, we are not a church, we don't want to be a church, we're just an educational facility, we're trying to teach people a better philosophy, but we're not a church. And yet, as we evolved into one, she became his minister. He would go attend Sunday services at her church in Los Angeles. So as an early African-American leader, she was a founder there, and for 40 years was the chief cook and bottle washer there, and a very successful center, I understand. And I'll just read a little bit about her biography here. It says, during her 40 years of service in the ministry, Mother Wood, as she was referred to, guided thousands to seek and realize God. With a full schedule of pastoral duties, she always found time to wisely counsel those who turned to her for help, even though they were not members of her church. Through the years, she also served as an officer and board member of the MSCC Congress, which I believe is the United Metropolitan Spiritual Churches of Christ Congress, as an elected member of the Church Council, Church of Religious Science, as a participant in the Interdenominational Ministerial Alliance and other progressive civic and church groups of local and national interest. Mother Wood received recognition and commendations from many civic and community relations groups. And I'm going to point that out, is that she stands as an example of what spirituality is. Yes, she had her own duties and she had her own community, but she was open and welcoming of anybody who came to her looking for advice, looking for counsel. She was there, and she reached out into the greater community, areas that probably weren't necessarily 100% friendly to her, and managed to interact and create a larger community by simply being a presence, being a participant, and being a contributor to these other organizations as well. Back in a time, and we're talking back in the 20s and 30s, when a person of her background, not so readily accepted. All right? So we often hear people today say that they're spiritual but not religious. We explored last week why religion is diminishing in our world today. So this week we are looking at the attraction to spirituality. Ernest Holmes writes, there is no stagnation in spirit, nor should there be any in our idea of spirituality. To be spiritual is to create. The spirit is alive, conscious, aware, and active. We often say we treat and move our feet. Spirituality is always in motion. Last week we talked about religion, and a principal difference is in this sense of continual motion. Spirituality is not mired down in dogma, tradition, or locked into any one interpretation. Spirituality is open at the top, always revealing innovative solutions and ideas. We're not stuck. We're not telling the same story over and over and over again and demanding that people accept it because it is so. Because it is so written. That we've done it this way for 2,000 years or 4,000 years or 500 years. So we have to keep doing it the same way. You know, we've all heard the saying that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. You can say the same thing about religious teachings. If there's been no progress, if there's been no solutions come out of what you've been doing, maybe it's time to examine what you've been doing and consider alternatives. Religious science provides for that. It doesn't have any set traditions, or it has a methodology called spiritual mind treatment that simply invites us to wake up, pay attention, and receive the knowledge of the universe, recognize the knowledge of the universe, and move forward. It instructs us and demands of us that we take anything that's holding us back and looking at it as whether or not it is valuable to us. And if it's the anchor that's holding us in place when we need to be moving, let it go. We talked the other day about the sailing ship riding at anchor. If you're riding at anchor in a bad storm, you might be in a bad spot. You might start dragging that anchor. You might be swung into a pier or a jetty or something that if you just cut the anchor loose and set out for the open sea and sail the ship properly, you'd be much better off. Most sailors would rather head for open ocean than get stuck, as they can't get into a really safe harbor. Holmes continues that spirituality is natural goodness. Spirituality is not a thing. It is the atmosphere of God's presence, or Spirit's presence, or Bob's presence, however you want to call it. Please don't hang up on God. Goodness, truth, and beauty. Spirituality is that innate goodness that comes out in people when disaster strikes. The outreached hand to a stranger, the compulsion to serve a community, to step into harm's way to spare others. Spirituality is recognizing beauty in its millions of forms, a butterfly in the breeze, fall colors in the forest, the giggle of a small child. Spirituality is recognizing that even the ugly experiences in our lives are acts of creation, lovingly manifested by a power that can only say yes to our deep subconscious beliefs. And yes, spirituality is turning your car around and going to pick up a friend who needs your help. So it is every day. It is what we do. It is who we are. Holmes continues, spirituality may be defined as an atmosphere of good, the realization of God. It cannot and does not borrow its light from another, no matter how great or noble that other may be. It springs from within, coming from that never-failing fountain of life which quenches every thirst, whose source is in eternity, the wellspring of self-existence. It is a revelation of the self to the self, putting one back on the track of his own self-dependence on spirit, our own at-one-ment with reality. Spirituality is whole and complete in and of itself. There can be no them and us in spirit, because spirit is all there is. We are of it, never separate from it. Spirit cannot create or be evil, because it cannot negate itself. It can only act on our beliefs, our freedom of choice, our freedom to stray brings about those experiences we wish we weren't having. Spirituality is the little boy walking along the beach after a massive storm, picking up and tossing some of the thousands of starfish washed up onto the sand back into the sea. And when asked why, in the face of so many stranded creatures, he even bothered, since it would not make any difference, he simply tossed another and explained, it made a difference to that. Spirituality is that part of us that just keeps pushing forward. It cannot stand still. Loving energy of spirit is a creative power. It does not have a beginning and it does not have an end. There is no part of spirit that says, this is the way it is, I defined it for you, I wrote it down in a book, now follow it word for word. If you have any questions, just look it up, the answer's in there somewhere. That's not spirituality. Spirituality is, I am constantly in motion, I am constantly evolving, and what you know today is a mere fraction of what there is to know. And the brightest thing you can do is recognize you've just begun. Every scientist will tell you, what we don't know so far outweighs what we do know. And our intelligence allows us the freedom to recognize there are still answers out there. There are questions we haven't even thought of yet. And spirituality is that part of us that just keeps seeking answers. Now, we all know people that go looking for problems to solutions they already have. And sometimes, we invent things that don't really have a useful life, and yet we go out and find a use for them. And we create a market for it, and we advertise it, and we tell people that they have a certain disease, that we just happen to have a medication that'll fix that. And we have to sometimes look at those and say, is that really a problem that we need to be solving? Okay, you stumbled across a certain chemical reaction that has a certain effect on our bodies or does something, but is it something we really need? Is there truly a value to it? Or is there a better way for the minor instances of that problem? We have all sorts of medications today for depression and other mental disorders, and there is certain value in using those medications. There's no doubt that there's, as a shortcut or as a short-term solution to get things under control. And if there is an actual physical breakdown in the brain that is causing something, perhaps it can be useful, and I'm not here to judge that. However, we also know that we, through our own experience, have come across person after person after person in our lives who just keep making bad choices. Choices that don't serve them, choices that just feed on their fears and their doubts and their lack of self-esteem. These people don't need medication. They need to recognize who they truly are. They need to recognize their own spirituality, their own power, their own strength. And through teachings like this one, we invite them to listen to Spirit, to understand the tool of spiritual mind treatment, which invites the power to flow through us, to create through us, to allow us to change what's not working in our lives, to come back into the fold of peace, harmony, truth, understanding, and love. Above all, love, because the power is nothing but love. And that special gift of freedom of choice, that gift that allows us to stray whenever we feel like it, and gives us the power to recognize that by straying, we're creating our own little hell. It's not something that comes later, it's something that's happening right now. If we're not in alignment, we're off the rails. And when we're off the rails, the road gets really rough. Spirituality is that energy, that being that wants to keep building, and building by allowing us to change, allowing us to look at what's not working and say, let's build on that by, number one, clearing away the debris, breaking down the parts that are rotted away, smoothing over the ground, and even building a brand new foundation. Sometimes you just can't fix the old building. Sometimes the old car just isn't going to be repaired anymore. And sometimes we need to wake up to the fact that it's time to clear the ground, drive in some new pilings, and start over. And not worry about the fact that I really loved that house. That was such a beautiful building. It has so many memories. Take some photographs. The memories are only yours, and they will never leave you. If the building isn't working, clear the ground and start over. Give yourself a break. I love to watch the DIY shows on Saturday and Sunday mornings where they go into these houses and, you know, they'll pay more to remodel the house than they pay to buy the house sometimes. And they always run into these problems that they didn't expect to find. And why, after doing 500 houses, these guys haven't figured out there's always something that they didn't recognize. I don't know, but, you know, it is such a joyous occasion for these people to take a structure that has served maybe multiple families for, you know, decades and decades in many cases, over a century in many cases, and turn it into something that can now serve new families for decades to come. It's safer, it's stronger, it's more efficient, it's more user-friendly. You know, back in the day, they liked to build rooms, little rooms apparently. And now we go in and they take those walls down and they open up the kitchens and they bring people into the kitchen where everybody is anyway. Somebody finally recognized, where does everybody wind up at a party, right? In the kitchen. So let's bring the kitchen into the living room. Let's make it part of the lifestyle. And they're beautiful. And people just love it. And I love to watch it. I love to do it when I have the opportunity. And spirituality is that process of taking something that has been good and can be better and making it so.